Welcome back to Company Grip Guitar. I'm Ben, and today we're going to be looking at this, the Divitone MF Studio. Let's check it out. I appreciate you taking the time to check out this video. It is a little bit overcast outside, so I'm sure the lighting's going to fluctuate a bit throughout the video, in case you're wondering what's going on. This is the new Divitone MF Studio guitar. I'm very thankful for them to send this to me to review. I've actually been playing it for about 3 weeks now until they sent me an email the other day that said, "How are you liking the guitar?" And I thought, you know what? I should probably set this thing down and get this review done. So that's what I'm doing now. Now this is how this review is going to go. It's going to be a pretty lengthy deep dive. So if you want to skip ahead at any point, there should be little tabs at the bottom of the window here for the video or in the description below. So you could skip ahead to, the hardware and electronics or just the sound test or my final thoughts on the guitar, so on and so forth. Just a reminder, Divitone did send me this guitar for free. However, they've not paid me for the review, and I am free to make any opinions about the guitar as I see fit. All right, let's get into it. So what is it? Well, the MF Studio guitar from Divitone is a smart guitar, and smart for good reason, because it's part of that growing line of guitars that has built-in electronics. And we'll get into that in a little bit here, because that section is going to be pretty beefy. But it's important to note that you can actually play the MF Studio just like a regular old guitar with the electronic system turned off. So then you're using your two pickups, your volume, your tone, and your pickup selector, and you just plug it into an amp and do what you've always done with electric guitars. Now, as far as the price goes, I believe that the MF Studio is going to retail for somewhere between $350 and $400. I don't believe they're actually for sale in the United States yet, but I did pull that number off of some European retailers and Asian retailers that I saw. And once I adjusted that number to US dollar amount, that's what it kind of was falling in that range, but don't hold me to that. Now, the MF Studio is available in 2 different models, and one of them is a slightly more upscale version of this guitar here with gold accents, and I believe the pickup bobbins match the finishes. But otherwise, I believe the electronics are 100% identical to this guitar. So the 5 finishes that this model is available in are Vinci Gray, Shell Pink, Bay Area Blue, Fluorite Green, and then this one here, which is known as Moon White. And then the 2 upscale models are known as Arctic Ore and Nebula Fade. Interesting finish names for sure. Fluorite Green, for whatever reason, I can't not think of Mouthwash. Now, speaking of interesting names, I did ask Divitone what MF Studio referred to, because as some of us know, MF is shorthand for a very classic Samuel L. Jackson phrase. However, they have told me that it stands for Modern Fly. Now, perhaps that is because the body kind of represents a little bit of what Parker Fly guitars look like, with the awkward lower horn that kind of bows outwards. Now, obviously, the upper horn had that 90-degree joint in it, but maybe that's what they were going for. Maybe it has nothing at all to do with the Parker Fly design. Now, the guitar did arrive in a black nylon gig bag emblazoned with the Divitone logo. As far as gig bags go, it's a bit on the thin side in terms of additional padding, but it will get the job done of carrying the guitar around from place to place. There is a neck strap to hold the guitar from bouncing around. That's always nice. There's also a nice padded carrying handle on the side and backpack style straps on the back. Back to the front side here, there is a pocket that has a bit of case candy in it. We've got a quick user guide, a warranty toe tag. We've got a USB-A to USB-C cable, as well as a USB adapter that makes the cable USB-C all around. We've got the tremolo bar, some adjustment tools, and lastly, a 10-foot guitar cable. So we've got a solid Okume body here with a bolt-on maple neck forming the basis of this 25.5-inch scale guitar. Okume is a wood I haven't really played around with too much, but in my research on this guitar, I've seen that you can buy it on $200 budget Ibanez guitars all the way up to $5,000 Fender custom shop guitars. The wood is known for being quite resonant and boosting the mid-range. As mentioned just a minute ago, the body is sort of like a mix between a Parker Fly and a offset S-style guitar. It's a little unique in that both the horns seem to almost flare out instead of back towards the neck, but I do like it. It is like a unique look, and that's harder and harder to come by these days with how many millions of guitars are available. So personally, I'm kind of a fan of it. Now, moving on to the carving for the body, well, there are just a few that are scattered around. First off, we got this right here, our little strumming carve. It's very, very minor, but it is enough where you can kind of see how the light catches it in a different way there. On the back side, we've got a pretty neat belly carve. which is very effective. I've noticed when I was playing it here, you know, it's in a great spot actually. And then lastly, we've got one tiny little carve right here for our fretting hand, just to give us a little bit more added access up to the 24th fret there. And that's right, this is a 2-octave neck, which is pretty awesome on a low budget guitar like this. Speaking of the 24 frets, they are mounted to this Purple Heart fretboard here, and that Purple Heart fretboard is mounted to this solid maple neck from the tip all the way down to where it connects to the body. This is all one piece, no scarf joints, nothing like that. Very cool design. I like the way that that looks as well. Not like scarf joints or anything that really affects me, but I just like the simplicity of it being one solid piece of maple. And it does feel very good as well. You know, it feels not quite like a solid satin neck or a sanded down neck, but it also isn't really glossy or sticky. Actually pretty phenomenal on this. I don't feel anything on the underside. There was a little bit of roughness on the top side of the very last frets here, but I don't think I'll ever touch those. So I can kind of overlook that right now, although it would be nice if that was a little bit more cleaned up. Now, speaking of measurements on this neck, for the nut here, we're getting a 1.64, which is pretty narrow, at least for my fat fingers here. Moving on to the first fret, we get a 0.83, and down here on the 12th fret, we get an increase to 0.95 inches. We've also got a 12-inch radius fretboard here. And moving on to the headstock, it's not the most unique headstock design. You've got all your tuners on the bass side of the fretboard there, but it gets the job done. Starting at the bottom here, we've got a pretty decent strap button with a nice mushroom going on there, so I think the guitar will be pretty secured in any normal strap. Same one on the bottom as the top there. And one thing I want to point out is all the online documentation referred to all the metal as chrome, but it's actually more of a darker gunmetal, as you can see there, which I think is a really nice look on this moon white finish. Now moving over from the strap button, we get to our jack plate, and as you can see, there is a lot going on there. So what we've got first of all is a regular 1/4 inch guitar jack, whatever you'd use to plug into your guitar amplifier, for example. Then next to that, we've got a 1/8 inch stereo headphone jack, and lastly, a USB jack. The USB jack can be used for a multitude of things like updating the firmware on the guitar or recording directly into a computer, but what it's probably going to be used most for is charging the internal electronics system. We'll talk about all that in a little bit here. Now moving on to the front side, we've got this nice trem here actually, and I say that because a lot of times on these budget guitars when you pull the back plate off, the trem has the smallest trem block you can find, but I was pleased to see that they put a full-size zinc block in this guitar. Now the bridge assembly is actually very nice. The saddles are all rounded over so your strings are less likely to catch. The plate has a knife edge on it so that when you're using the trem it has a better or higher likelihood of returning exactly where it was. Now one thing I do want to point out is the paperwork said that this trem bar was one of those standard screw-in types. This, however, is not what's on the guitar. This one you just slip in there and there's a grub nut to tighten where you want it. Now right now I've got it decently cranked down so I can set the bar wherever I want it or flick it out of the way, but you could crank it down so it takes an effort to move it out of the way, or you could just loosen it so it holds the bar in there but flops around freely. Now moving on to the pickups, these are what Divitone describes as MF custom humbuckers, and as you can imagine, there's really no information out there on them. You can see the backside of the pickups, nothing written there, so I was unable to dig up anything. I don't know if they're Alnico magnets, I don't know if they are ceramic magnets, but I can tell you what I do know is that they are hard mounted to the body. There are springs under the pickups though to keep them in tension, so you can raise and lower them closer to the strings to whatever you desire there. I can also give you the readings on these pickups. So starting with position 1, which is the entire humbucker, I'm getting a reading of 14.76. Position 2, which is just the inner coil of the bridge humbucker, I'm getting a 7.53. Position 3 is the 2 inner coils, and I'm getting a 3.17 right there. Position 4 is just the inner coil of the neck pickup, and I'm getting a 5.33 there. And lastly, position 5 is the entire neck humbucker, and I'm getting a 7.93. Now obviously all these pickups are controlled with these 2 master controls, as you've probably noticed, the master volume and master tone, and then of course the 5-way selector. Now these will also play into the smart guitar system, which I'll talk about just after this section. But moving on, let's talk about this. We've got the truss rod adjustment right there below the fretboard, and they do actually give you some tools to stick in there and adjust it, and I did kind of mess with it a little bit. Works very easily. Then we've got 24 frets on the neck. These all feel really good with the exception of the top side of just a couple down here at the very end of the fretboard, but I'll never touch those, so I can overlook that. Moving up to the headstock here, we've got our tuners. Now these are a nice 15:1 ratio. They work very well also. My only gripe is they're just so close to each other for these fat fingers, but that is not an issue that is isolated to just this guitar by any means. Now just over from that, we get to our string tree, which Divitone always recommends you use for your E and your B strings, and they will receive no complaints from me about that. Now moving to the backside, not a lot going on here. We've got 4 bolts for the neck. These plates, which are normally in the other material section of my reviews, actually go here because every single one of them is metal. Now one plate I want to talk about down here houses, and I think this is going to please some people, the battery. Now I say that because every time I do a review on like a smart guitar or even the Mustang Micro or any of the built-in effects, a lot of people have concerns about the batteries going dead or, starting to degrade and then having to ship it off for service. Well, not in this case. This battery you have full access to, and I checked it out. This is a DTP 18650 battery. You can find them on Amazon.com for like $10, which is pretty reasonable, but I don't expect this thing to go out for quite some time. Now, in case you're curious, Divitone does say that you will get about 9 hours of battery life out of a full charge, which should be more than enough for the average jam session. Now, in case you're wondering what's underneath this electronics compartment here, well, I am sad to say that even though I did undo all the screws, I gave it a little bit of a pull, and the way that they must have wired it all in there is, I can only imagine they probably fed in the pickups and then the controls and soldered it, and it was very tight. I didn't want to force it and break a solder joint or something. So unfortunately, all I have is this tiny crack to look through there, but you can see there's a lot of wires and electronics and circuit boards, and I don't think anybody was going to be able to make heads or tails of that anyway. So unfortunately, that's the best look I got for that. So now we move on to the smart guitar aspect of the MF Studio, and this is really the heart and soul of this guitar, and this section is going to be quite lengthy, so bear with me. So I mentioned that you've got a master volume and a master tone. Well, these are actually encoders, meaning you can press them, and they do have a slight give, and you'll feel it too. There is definitely like a audible click to it, as opposed to being like a traditional push-pull knob. Now, how you would activate the smart guitar mode is you would hold down the volume mode, and this is actually my first pet peeve of the guitar, is you have to have something plugged into the 1/4-inch jack or the 1/8-inch jack for the guitar to recognize that you want to turn on the smart guitar system. So I hold down the volume for a couple seconds. You'll see that the switch tip ring will light up. I don't know if you can see that on there, but it changes colors with the pickup selectors, which we'll get into what that means in a little bit here. Now I'll hold down the tone knob to activate the Bluetooth. Here we go, searching for available devices. There's the guitar, click it, connect device. So now that we've got the app open, it's important to mention that you actually don't need the app open to use the smart features on the guitar. You can access all the presets, but you need the app open if you want to edit those presets. Now the presets are broken up into banks of 5. There are 20 different banks totaling 100 presets. The first 50 presets are duplicated in the second 50 presets. So 1 through 50 is the exact same as 51 through 100. However, 51 through 100 you can't edit, and 1 through 50 you can. So do whatever you want to those first 50 presets, because if you mess something up, you can always recall one of the later presets that's just a duplicate of that and change it again. Now the first 10 preset banks are banks A through J. Those are the ones that you can edit there. Man, I hope that makes sense because it was confusing saying it. So now let's talk about editing a preset, because it's actually very well laid out and pretty easy to use, which I definitely appreciate. So there's a couple things that you'll see on the screen here. You've got basically your section where you can edit all your presets. The first one is known as the sim, which would be the guitar model or sound that you're trying to simulate. Next section would be the gate section. Section after that would be the pre-effects, which is preamp, pre-IR effects. You've got a couple different options there. You can do a chorus, you can do a comp, you can do filters, you can do boosts, you can do phasers, tremolos, vibratos, a lot of options there. The next section is the drive section, and of course you've got a multitude of options there as well. Then we move on to our amp sim, and there's something like I think 25 or 30 different amp sims there. Then we get to our IRs, which is the next tab over. And of course, you've got another 20 or 30 different IRs that you can choose from. Then you get into the EQ/mod section. Now that next section has another bank of like 20 different settings you could do. You could do choruses, you could do flangers, you could do vibratos, you could do pitch shifting, all sorts of effects. And then lastly, we get to our time-based effects, which would be the delay next. And then after that, we've got a reverb. To turn on any effect is very simple as well. You would just say, in this case, the delay menu, it says tube. I would just click that little slider tab and now delay is on. Click it again and now delay is off. Pretty easy to adjust everything. Now something to point out is you see that dashed line there that surrounds the driver, the amp, the IR, and the EQ mod section. Those are bound within the signal chain path. You cannot change the order of those 4 effects. But the other 5 effects, I can totally change those around by just dragging and dropping with my finger. So for example, let's say I want my reverb to go into the distortion pedal to create just this crazy sort of drone sound. I could drag the reverb with my finger and put it right there next to the drive section, turn it on, turn on the drive, and now I get this kind of trippy So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about building an actual preset. So I've reset everything on here so everything is off, and we're going to start from the very beginning and we'll just build a basic preset. So the first option there is the sim. Now what this is you are selecting what you want the app or the system inside the guitar to simulate sounding like in terms of your input instrument. So you've got options like Les Paul, you could do a Telecaster, Stratocaster, Dreadnought acoustic, Jumbo acoustic. I'm going to select a Telecaster neck pickup. So I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to use whatever it's got inside the guitar to simulate that. Now, one thing that is interesting about this is even though that is the sound that it is simulating, let me turn it on by hitting this little tab here, you can actually select which pickup on the guitar it wants to use to process to sound like that. So that gives you a whole host of options. But for this case, I'm going to do a single neck pickup, which is the inner coil of the neck humbucker there. And when I record something, it's going to say that this is a Telecaster neck pickup. You can be the judge of how you think that compares to a real Telecaster. So I'm going to use that as my base for this preset that I'm making. Now I'll move on to the next section, which is the gate. Personally, I'm not really a big fan of gates, so I'm going to leave that off. Next section is the pre-effect before it goes into the amp or the drive pedal. And I've got options like the compressor, I've got a filter, I've got a boost, a chorus, a flanger, a phaser, a vibrato, a tremolo. I'm going to do a chorus 1. Now, one thing I really like that they do is in the manual that's online, they actually tell you a lot about each effect. And that's very welcome because a lot of times on these sort of multi-effects, low-budget pedals, it'll just say like chorus 1, chorus 2 and no description. But this will go into, I think, as much legal detail as they can about what they're copying or emulating. So now that I've got a chorus on there, moving on to the next section, drive. Do we want any drive? Maybe just a tiny bit. So I'm going to put overdrive on, and I'll select up here where it says Butter OD. I'll hit OK, and I got to make sure to turn it on with the little tab there. And let's see. It's a little hot. I'm going to turn that down just a tiny bit and give that a shot. Now the next section is where we start to get to the fun stuff, the amps, the IRs, that sort of thing. So I'm going to turn on the, let's see, a clean amp. You've got a couple options there as well. I'll put on the Tweed Deluxe, and let's see what that sounds like. Getting closer. Now we go to the IRs. Bunch of options in here as well, but you can also load your own user IRs, which is Very cool. Now I've got a couple that I preloaded in here. I'm going to do this Mesa that I got offline somewhere, and we'll turn that on. And let's see what that sounds like now. Okay, moving on from there, we can get to our EQ and mod section. Do I want anything for this? Let's see, I've already got a chorus on, so I don't really want that. Maybe I could do a very slow vibrato. Let's see. Depth, we'll turn that down quite a bit. And make sure we turn that on. Great, then we get to our time-based effects. We've got delay and reverb left over. I don't want any delay, so I'm going to leave that off. And for reverb, I'm going to put a tiny bit of spring verb, and I'll lower the mix down pretty low on that. And I'm going to raise up the decay a little bit there as well. We'll put that at 44%. And this is what I'm doing here. So that's my basic patch there. I'm going to save it very easily by clicking on this box with a down arrow. That means save. And I'm going to save it in the A1 patch position there, and I'm going to call it Acousal, because why not? And I hit OK, and that is my Acousal patch, whatever that means. Now, one thing I do want to point out is you might have noticed when we go to the amp section here, it says amp mode or tone lift mode. Now, tone lift is really cool because this thing will actually load in the neural amp modeler files, which you can download millions of those online. And I have actually loaded some of those into this as well. You can load up to 5 of those, I believe. So I'm going to do load up, clone, effect name, click the dots next to it, import sample. And I've got one here that says JP2C capture, which is a capture somebody made of, I actually don't remember the module anymore. I apologize for that, but long story short, you can definitely load in the neural amp files, which is great. So as this turns the wheel of destiny and loads it into here, I'm going to hit OK. So now that I've loaded this neural amp modeler file, this is what it sounds like. Not exactly what I was going for with this patch, so I'm going to turn that back off, but I wanted to show you that capability that you could do that. All right, so I'll go back to the mode there and click amp mode instead of using the neural amp file, and now we should be back to what we were just doing. So that's the basics of making a patch on a very user-friendly interface, which is very welcome for sure. Now let's talk about some of the other features on this app. So right next to the square up there that saves it, you'll see a little pencil. Well, that's how you would just change the name of the patch. Now, I think we can agree Acousal doesn't really mean anything, and it doesn't really describe this patch. So I'm going to call it Tele Chorus. And I'll hit OK. Now, unfortunately, you do only get 10 digits to name your patch. It would be nice if there's a little bit more so you could get a little more descriptive, like Tele Clean Chorus would be more descriptive. But that's basically it. And I'm going to save it again, and it's going to save it as Telecore in the preset number bank A number 1. Hit OK, and then next to that you see we've got 3 dots. That's where you can import or export your patches. That needs a little bit of work there. I haven't had any luck with actually exporting anything, so I do think that Divitone needs to do a touch-up on that section. But that's really the only section of the app that I've had an issue with. Let's see, moving down here to the settings, there's a whole bunch of different volumes where you can adjust things like your global volume, your input volume, your record level, the monitoring. You've got a built-in tuner, and what's great about this tuner is it's actually reading from a tuner built into the guitar. So I don't need to hold this up to the guitar and strum it. I can play it out here and just barely pluck a note, and you'll see my E string is in tune. That's very cool to have it built in like that. I mentioned that these are encoders, which means you can press them and they have certain features. And they're not just for turning the smart system on and activating the Bluetooth, but this is where you can actually select what they do once the system is on. So for example, a short press of the volume would change. I've got it set to change the preset up, and a double click of the volume changes the bank up. A short press of the tone knob sets the preset down, and a double press brings the bank down. Now the last section you see there says volume plus tone knob, which means you click both of them at the same time, And in this case, I've got it set to change the smart switch or the pickup selector. So when I go back to the menu here, you can see where it says smart switch pickup change. Well, that was meaning that if I'm in position 1, it's the bridge. If I'm in position 5, it's the neck. But if I click on both once, which you can see right here, now the smart switch is back to functioning as a preset selector within your bank. So now I'm on patch 1, as you can see up here at the top, and all the way down in the bridge position, now I'm at patch 5. So it's nice to have that functionality built into the 2 encoder knobs there. The next section is called preset color. Now this is kind of cool. You can change what each patch or preset within each bank color is. So you don't have like total control over all 50, but you can change 1, 2, 3, and 5 within each bank. So let's say you know that preset 2 within each bank is always a distorted sound. You can change it red so that it's, matches like a fuzz face pedal in your mind. You see when it's red, it's going to be distorted. Or position, let's say 5, you want it to be, green to match like a tube screamer sound. So you change it to that sort of green. So that's kind of nice. Then you'll see on the guitar, now it's green and red is patch 2. Now moving on with the features of the app, there's another feature there you see at the bottom called drum. Now I don't want to quite call this a drum machine in the sense that you can't really program it, but there are something like 50 or 100 different drum patterns that are built into it, which are great for practicing. So you could turn on like rock mode. You can change the BPM, which is really cool. And I think probably most importantly, at least for me, is there's a metronome section in there too, which has selections going from, quarter beats all the way up to 9/8 time, which is, in case you want to practice like some obscure David Byrne song or something like that. That's kind of the gist of the app, which is very functional, and I think it sounds pretty good as well. It's a lot of fun, which is why I've been playing it for a couple weeks instead of doing this review. Now let's move on beyond the app, back to the guitar. There's a few more things to touch on before we get into the sound test. So as far as the other materials on this guitar, well, there's really not a lot to go on because the stuff I normally talk about, like the plates on the back, is metal, but there is a few things. So there's a couple felt pads between the strap buttons and the body of the guitar. Then you've got mostly black plastics, which would be the selector ring there and the switch tip, as well as the bobbins on the guitar also. We've got some inlays here. These are just plastic inlays, but they are offset from center, which I think is a nice look for it. You've got, of course, 2 on the 12 and 2 on the 24th fret, which matches the side inlays. You've also got those going down the fretboard, 2 again at the 12 and 2 at the 24. And then up here at the top, you've just got a simple Divitone logo with the MF series there written in small print. And that's kind of it, really. As far as the feel goes, I think the guitar feels really great, actually. The neck is lovely neck. I do like that. And then you've got a pretty effective belly carve, which I honestly think if this carve wasn't here, this guitar would be a lot more cumbersome because it is kind of sharp edges and it's not the lightest guitar. This thing weighs in somewhere around 7.41 pounds or about 7 pounds and 6.5 ounces, but it does feel really nice in your hands. Let's check out the neck dive test now. So this is a pretty standard 2-inch wide strap, which is what I think most people have. This one is a locket strap, which means I can click it on here and it'll hold the guitar without coming off, but also being a thin profile. I did receive a nice compliment the other day that said, "I'm really glad you do neck dive tests. No one does that," which surprised me. All right, so let's see. Ooh, that's nice. What if I set it down here? Okay, what if I played like this? So that's nice. It's nice that it stays in position, which very cool. All right, now let's move on to the sound test. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you know that I try to put as much information on the screen as possible, which would be like the volume setting, the tone setting, pickup selector settings, all sorts of things. I will be running the normal guitar through 2 pedals, which would be the Tube Screamer and the Behringer Centaur, which is their clone. Those pedals will be going into a Bugera V5 amp, which is then mic'd and brought into my DAW. If you hear any reverb or delay, that's something I add in post as I see fit. Now I'll also use the Smart system on this guitar, which will be the built-in effects. And for that, I'm going to go direct into my computer using the IRs that are within the app, so we can get an idea of what those sound like as well. And any of those effects will all be within the guitar also, which would be like reverbs or delays or drives, any of that stuff. I have tuned the guitar to my own specifications, which means adjusting the action a little bit, adjusting these just a little bit as well, and putting on my preferred strings, which are the Stringjoy Broadway Customs. Check them out. I love those strings. You can select any gauge you want for any string and build your own custom set. Pretty awesome. They don't pay me to say this. I just love the strings so much that I want to get that information out there. All right, let's get into it. Thanks for checking out my review of the Divitone MF Studio guitar. Now my thoughts on it, I think it plays great. I did set it up to my own playing style, but I think it plays really great and I had a blast playing this thing. The app, super awesome as well. I think it sounds great. I love that you can import your IRs. I love all the built-in stuff. It's very easy to use, very powerful. And I've reviewed a couple of these like multi-smart guitar things like the Enya Nova Go Sonic, and then also the Jamstick was like a electric guitar with MIDI stuff built in. But this one has the differentiation of that it actually feels like a guitar first. And that is something that is hard to beat, I think. Now, a couple areas where I think the guitar could have a little bit of improvement is, first off, the pickups. I don't think they're great sounding pickups in standard guitar mode. It's something you get on all the low budget guitars is they just find general pickups and they put them in there and they're always a little bit shrill and you have to adjust your amp so that they're not so harsh. And I don't know, I kind of wish one day that for one of these guitars, they wouldn't rely just on the electronics that are built into it, but they would maybe spend like an extra $50 and throw in like some Seymour Duncans, and you could reflect that in the price of the guitar, because I guarantee if this thing was on Amazon.com and it said it had, you know, whatever Seymour Duncan pickup that is affordable but has that name on it, I think you would draw in more people. A couple other weird things, or quirks I should say, is the screws here for the saddles were really long when I got the guitar, and they were just eating up my palm there. So I did replace those. That's very easy to do if you want to do it yourself. You can buy like 5 million of them for $10 on Amazon.com. I did remove one of the tension springs for the trem system on the back. That's not really a problem with the guitar. It could be because I just use a very light gauge on my strings. So you might put it back in there if you use like a Stevie Ray Vaughan 13 set or something like that. If anybody asked me what I think of the guitar, I would 100% recommend it. And that is my honest opinion about the guitar. Anyway, thanks for checking out my review. I want to thank Divitone for sending this to me. It is an awesome guitar. I want to thank my Patreon subscribers for supporting my channel as well, and everyone else out there that has watched my channel. I definitely appreciate that. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, or if you have any thoughts on the guitar, I'd love to hear that as well. If you liked content like this, consider clicking the like button, or better yet, consider clicking the subscribe button. And with that, I will talk to you next time.